Hello everybody and welcome to a very special episode of CaiKeys. Why is today's episode special, I hear you ask? Well, it's because today we'll be talking about a very special car, and it's this. It's the Rover 75. But this isn't just any Rover 75, because this is my daily driver. So come on, we're going to get it out on the road, and I'm going to tell you why the 75 is, without a doubt, one of the best vehicles ever made. It is an absolutely beautiful, crisp spring morning today. And I thought, let's get a lovely photo shoot, let's do the car justice. But this car is so janky and so ruined that these lovely surroundings just don't do the thing justice. So I took a drive to my local asbestos factory and I asked the lads there if I could very kindly use their warehouse bay to get some disgusting pictures of the 75, and they said sure. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of history about the car over some images and videos that really suit the jank of this thing. The Rover 75 was the car to save the company. Launched in 1998, the 75 replaced the old Rover 600 and 800 and was the last properly all-new Rover ever made. We don't talk about the City Rover. They were initially made down in Oxford, but production soon moved up to Longbridge. The 75 had a decent run, being produced until 2005, when the company unfortunately went bankrupt. It seems that the 75 couldn't quite save Rover, so the 75 is debatably the last proper, affordable, genuinely British motor, depending on how you look at it. Well, it's at least as British as the Windsors on account of the German engines and ownership. The 75 came at a really important time for Rover. It was the flagship of the range, and it was kind of the make or break car. It had the potential to be the saviour for the company. And unfortunately, Rover still ended up going bankrupt in 2005, which is one of the greatest tragedies of the motoring world. However, they put together a phenomenal car, and the 75 really is an amazing swan song to Rover. As soon as you sit in the thing, it's just its own thing. It's very distinct in here. I absolutely love the interior styling of this, and to be honest, that's really what won me over when I purchased my first 75 all those years ago back in 2017, and I can still remember that day now. I drove down to the dealership, who was just operating out of a porter cabin behind a tip, and I spent about 2 hours looking over this basically pristine Rover 75, and the salesman just thought I was pulling his leg. He just did not comprehend the fact that a 17-year-old kid essentially wanted to buy what's known as an old man car. But I did, and I think it was a really sensible decision. The Rover 75 is cheap. You can find these things in janky condition like this for about 500 quid, and really pristine examples you can find from about £2,000 up, and prices are slowly, they appear to be, rising. But they're still very cheap and very affordable cars. So I purchased my first Rover 75 for £2,000, and I have so many pictures of that thing. I posted a picture up on the Rover 75 Owners Club that got in the calendar. I had an Owners Club grill badge on the front, and I had one of those old AA type badges on the grill. I took absolute pride in that thing, and I drove it absolutely everywhere. It's incredibly foggy up here, so we've got to be careful. And when I wasn't driving that 75 around aimlessly or running over friends, I was washing the thing. I never stopped polishing and washing the thing because I loved that car. This, on the other hand, this is my daily driver. I have to be in work for 6 o'clock in the morning, so this thing leaves the house at around 5:30 every day. It drives to work, not particularly sympathetically, and it comes back and may be driven rather hard on the way back because, you know, I want to get back home. And I can't remember ever washing this thing, to be honest with you. This is a different class of Rover to my old one, but it's still, despite being a poor example, a really competent vehicle. Regarding the interior, like I said, you have this absolutely stunning walnut dash, and that's real walnut veneer, by the way. Leads me on to a point actually I need to make regarding Rover, and specifically the 75. Rover were really not doing very well in the early 2000s, and as a result they had to cut costs from lots of their cars, and they did this with the 75, and there's an awful lot of little tweaks they made over the years, which you might not notice at first, but once you start reading up on them, some little bits and pieces that will really, really annoy you about the 75, things that they changed. Some of them are only little. For example, the seat belts, the bottom of those where they bolt into the body of the car, there were little plastic caps, which they eventually removed, and that must have saved them, what, about 5p per car. Some of them, however, are a lot more egregious. The most notable of which is the removal of this absolutely stunning walnut dashboard, and it really is beautiful, to be replaced by a plastic wood dashboard, which is, it still looks okay, but once you compare them side by side with a real wood one and a fake wood one, the real one just shines. It looks so much better. And plus, fake wood in the Rover, it's not really part of the experience. Everything wooden-wise below here has always been plastic, but the dashboard is the massive wow factor of the interior of this car, and you'll want it to be real wood. So there's a quick way of you to see if your dashboard is real or fake wood. On the passenger side, there's a little thing that says airbag, and if it looks like it's been written directly onto the wood in a kind of silvery gold writing, that means that it is, like this one, a real walnut dashboard. If, however, it looks like a little embossed kind of badge with a kind of visible lip around it, then unfortunately you have a plastic dashboard, and your best bet is to go to a breaker's yard or get on eBay, get yourself a real wood dashboard and install it. Doesn't take too long. You can probably do it in about 2 or 3 hours, maybe with a cup of tea in between. It's a bit fiddly, however, but it's not technically difficult. You do have to watch out though, because an awful lot of the wooden dashboards I've seen, I'm not entirely sure if it's due to just weather factors and temperature variations, or whether it's due to improper removal, but an awful lot of these things seem to get chipped and damaged. So make sure you get yourself a really decent one without any chips. Best modification you can make in a 75. Another thing they removed is these embossed headrests, which I managed to find on eBay fairly cheap. They just look nice. There really is a tangible difference in quality between the pre-facelift 75s, the early ones, and the later pre-facelifts and the post-facelifts. They're just different cars. These ones are just more pleasant. As I was saying, this one has not been well looked after. I bought this on eBay. I saw that there was a 75 up for sale that was ending in a few hours, about 4 hours, and I thought, right, I'll put a bid on this, it looks great. I won, so I went up to Penrith to collect my 75, and the man kind of handed me the keys, and obviously I handed in the cash, and he kind of couldn't wait to drive off fast enough. And I thought, that's a bit odd. Nothing in this car works anymore. I do have a long list, which I might cut to, but it might take about 25 minutes to list everything wrong with the vehicle. So as you can see, this is not the best example of a 75. The important thing is though, it does get me to work, and it's only ever really left me stranded once. Technically twice, but once, and both times were for really minor issues. So the first time was a battery nut and bolt had come loose. It was 5:30. I didn't really have time to diagnose it, and so I took a taxi into work. Fair enough, that can happen with any vehicle. The second time I was driving to work, I got there fine, got back in the car, oh, power steering's gone, oh, my battery icon's on. I thought, you know what, I just want to get back from work. My auxiliary belt had failed, it had just slipped off. and I managed to get the car most of the way home. I managed to pull it over, pull it into an Asda car park, and there it broke down. I eventually got it back. I just charged up the battery and drove it the remainder of the way home. And then I set to fixing the auxiliary belt. You guys on the club, on the Rover 75 Owners Club, said it would be a really simple job. It's dead easy. Yeah, it took me ages. I had to go out and buy an angle grinder, a Black & Decker workmate, because for some reason the engine in this car is transverse, and I don't really understand why. You've got this massive long engine bay. You could have put a longitudinal engine in. It wouldn't have been a problem. It's not really a major issue, I suppose. It's just one of those weird Rover design choices. You guys on the club must have some seriously small hands, because access to it was an absolute nightmare. I eventually found out that the easiest way of doing it really was to support the engine from underneath and take off the engine mount, just so I had a little bit more room to actually get the leverage on that tensioner, which you needed to be He-Man to actually pull back. I hear a lot of people class the 75 as a luxury saloon car, and I can see where they're coming from. I really can, because you sit in this thing and the interior is stunning, but I'm not sure I'd class it as a luxury vehicle. There's, even in these pre-facelift models, there's an awful lot of fake wood, and some of the materials feel a little bit flimsy. This indicator stalk is adequate, but nothing's particularly heavy. You've got an awful lot of plastic, but you need to bear in mind this isn't a Bentley, this isn't a Rolls-Royce, it's a completely different class of vehicle, and even at the time it was about 6 times cheaper than one. For what the 75 is, it is a phenomenal car and a lovely place to sit, but luxury it is not. Bear in mind that the 75 is front-wheel drive, which admittedly there are luxury front-wheel drive cars, but I think it's a great shame. I really do, because you've got this massive transmission tunnel as well. I really have never been able to understand why they didn't produce this car in rear-wheel drive initially. And there's a lot of people on the forums, I'm sure, who will come by and say why they didn't produce this car in rear-wheel drive. But when you look at the competitors like the S-Type and the E39, those are rear-wheel drive. Why couldn't this have been? And that leads me on to the engine choices in the 75. The drivetrain, okay, fine, we can get past that, but engine-wise, it really is quite unfortunate with the 75. You had the 1.8 litre K-Series. Now that's a much maligned engine. The K-Series, even amongst people who don't really know about cars, they'll go, oh, Rovers, they blow up, the head gaskets go on them, don't they? And that's unfortunately kind of true. It's because of the K-Series. A bit maligned because you can fit a new head gasket in and they will not fail. I believe it was due to them being incorrectly torqued at the factory. But they're good engines. They produce an awful lot of power for their size, and they were used in cars such as the Lotus Elise. So, you know, you've got lightweight and a good amount of power behind them. And some people have been able to make silly amounts of power from the 1.8 K-Series. You had the 2 litre V6 at launch, which wasn't really good at anything. It was refined, it was very smooth, but fuel efficiency was poor and power was also poor. You would have got the 2.5 litre V6, which was essentially the 2 litre V6, but not terrible. The 2.5 V6, I have driven one, and it is a really genuinely nice engine. It's very smooth, it's very refined, and you have approximately 190 horsepower, and that is an engine that really does fit the car. We should have had more V6s though, maybe a higher capacity, a 3 litre, a 3.5, with just a little bit more torque and power. It would have really suited this car. And then you have the engine, which there's an awful lot of discussion about, and I've noticed a little bit of a change in opinion regarding it, and that's the engine that I've had in both 75s. It's the 2 litre diesel. Now, it's actually kind of a BMW unit. It's based on the BMW M47R. Now, the M47R, look, as far as BMWs go, people say you should buy the 6-cylinder petrol BMWs or the 4-cylinder diesels, and they're right, because they have a reputation for longevity and refinement. The 75 diesel is not the most refined.
We'll try and do the old balance a penny on the engine trick, which they do on Rolls Royces, to show how refined they are. Watch this. That is a refined diesel engine there.
But the M47 from BMW, brilliant engine, just had one fatal flaw, and that fatal flaw is that it would eat its own swirl flaps and die horribly. So Rover, in their infinite wisdom, decided, let's just take out the swirl flaps. Solved. The M47 is a really good engine, but I do see a lot of people say that the ancillaries and everything around the engine breaks. From personal experience, anecdotally, the 75 diesel, I've never had any problems with the M47R engine whatsoever. On either of my 75s, they've just not had any really mechanical problems. The problems have always been body and electrics, and even then, not been too bad. Is the diesel right for you? Well, the diesel came in 2 states of tune initially. It came in the 116 horsepower and the 131 horsepower, thereabouts. Those are what the 2 tunes are known as. Doesn't matter which one you get, because you're gonna get it remapped. You're gonna get what is known as the 160 remap. This makes the car actually drivable. 116 brake horsepower in its base tune is just not it. It's just no good. It will keep up with traffic, but in a car like this, you kind of want it to be lazy, you kind of want it to be wafty. You don't want to be on the throttle absolutely everywhere you go, which if you get the 116, you will be. The 131 is a little bit more pleasant to live with, and I'd go so far as to saying it's kind of impressive. But in a car like this, you want that effortless torque, you want that effortless power, and that's why I really think that there should have also been some higher displacement engines added to the lineup. That really would have improved that premium image for Rover. Okay, little bit of interesting information, and there's some really good YouTube videos on this car, the Rover 75 V8. So towards the end of Rover's life, when the writing was on the wall, they decided to do something a little bit stupid, and that's a kind of MG-Rover thing to do, something absolutely ridiculous. They decided, let's get the 75, our flagship model, and let's take a nice V8 engine, not the Rover V8, that'd make too much sense. Let's go to Ford and take their 4.6 litre V8 that they use in the Mustang, the Crown Victoria, the Lincoln Town Car. Yeah, let's chuck one of those under the engine bay. Amazing idea, and that was known as the Rover 75 V8, I believe the 260. It had about 260 horsepower. Now, I don't know how you only squeeze 260 horsepower from a 4.6 litre V8, but those things can be supercharged, and that is the holy grail of Rover, and I would love one. I really would. Just, Rover are known, they've always been known for making ridiculous financial decisions, and even when the writing was on the wall, that was one of them. I can't see how they would have made any money from that, because they sold barely any of them, but I'm so glad they did. That's why I love Rover, just doing stupid things. There's a lot of criticism that the 75 was too retro, it was too backwards, but I'm not sure I agree. I think it's more traditional. Rover's a car manufacturer with an awful lot of heritage behind it, and they were really forward-looking back in the day. Chrysler admittedly kind of pioneered the turbine cars, but Rover at a very similar time, it may have actually been before Chrysler, also did with the famous Rover Jet 1, which you can see at the British Motor Museum in Gaydon, which is so worth a visit. Rover also had the first European car of the year, I believe it was the Rover P6, and they've always produced some really phenomenal cars. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Rover have never really made a bad car. I don't think they have. They've made cars which are admittedly of iffy quality, but even at their lowest moments, like the SD1, they were really cool vehicles. The car suits these kind of roads. If you've got an absolutely pristine 75, it's nice to get in the thing and drive it to the pub. There's this real sense of occasion behind the wheel of these. I'd like to add as well that for whatever reason, my 75 smokes like Fred Dibner. It really does. It's ridiculous. My old one never did, so I don't know what's going on with that. I'm not entirely sure that it's going to pass its MOT, so we're kind of unfortunately on borrowed time with this 75. I love this car. Oh no, that's not what we wanted to happen. For a front-wheel drive car, it does handle particularly well. The suspension is obviously very much on the floaty side, but if you don't like that, you can get the MG-ZT, which is the kind of sportier model you've got, stiffer suspension. And that's a car that I've also never really been able to understand, and it leads me back to my point about there not being a really good range of engines. Road holding on the 75 is pretty good. It's front wheel drive, so obviously it leans in a little bit to understeer, but it's remarkable the amount of grip you have in this. I think that's due really to the fact that this is quite a heavy car. You've got a fair bit of weight on the front tyres, and you've got a fair bit of grip. I've never really noticed, unless you push this, it kind of goes exactly where you point it. Even when you're kind of driving it at the limits, it's very predictable and it will make those corners. Compare this to the Micra convertible that I drove a few weeks ago, where you're just screaming around everything. This car will make more progress than that. It is brisker, it is smoother, it's nicer to drive, but you don't get that scrabbly fun round the corners. It's a totally different class of car though. As I said in my other video, we're only really on our third car review, so there's only so many comparisons I can make. But for being a front-wheel drive, big vehicle, the 75 really does feel very confident around the corners. Regarding fuel efficiency, there's a reason that this car is my daily driver, and that's because I will get 50 miles per gallon fairly consistently. Everything is making a funny noise in this thing right now, and it's not very healthy, but that's okay. And there's something really quite freeing about having a daily driver a little bit like this. That didn't sound right. I'm not sure if this will even make it to MOT. Yeah, that's another thing with the 75. It's a really low car and you will bottom it out. I've bottomed the thing out on the motorway before now. Just going the speed limit, going 70 miles an hour, go over a slight bump in the motorway. And when you do, if you are looking for a 75, look underneath it, because the sills will probably be absolutely smashed up. I think I've said all that needs to be said about the 75. So, there you have it, the CaiKeys Rover 75, my very own. And unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure that this car is too long for this world, and that's a shame. But it's had a good run, it's not been very well looked after, and in spite of that, it's still a really nice car, and that's testament to Rover's build quality, Rover's heritage, and the fact that the 75 is just a better car than the E39 and the S-Type. You can hold me to that. That's an opinion I'll take to the grave. The 75 is a car that's really close to my heart. I love it. I'll be sad to see it go. But, hey, if the channel takes off, at some point, I will definitely buy one of these with the massive 4.6 litre V8. So thank you very much for watching, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this, and I really hope that I've convinced you to buy not one that's this janky, but a Rover 75 of your very own. It'll be one of the best or worst decisions you ever make. And remember, most importantly, don't forget your CaiKeys. Thank you. That's another thing to add to the broken list.